Moving on, we are being joined by Ms. Rosevalene Uzoma Obia, who is a registered dietitian nutritionist and the convener, Ruzi Creative Mind Medical Outreach. Thank you for joining us on the program, Ms. Rosevalene, and it's nice having you once again after a long period of time. Thank you. So, moving on straight to our conversation on nutrition and pregnant women. What are essential nutrients that pregnant women need for their upkeep and the sustenance of their unborn children?
Okay, the first thing one needs to know is what is pregnancy? Pregnancy is the development of a fetus in a womb called a uterus. Now, during pregnancy, two things are considered: the weight gain of the mother and the child. But aside the weight gain of the mother and the child, during pregnancy, during the weight gain process, residing it's the uterus, the size of the uterus, the placenta, the maternal reproductive tissues, and we also have in the maternal reproductive tissues, we have the amniotic fluid, blood, and maternal stores, which are components of the body fat. It simply means that nutrition is also needed for all of these things mentioned to grow. Now, those things are the things that add up for the nutrition in pregnancy of a mother and a child. Now, maternal nutrition is very important in pregnancy. Why? Because it's a way of helping both the mother and child in terms of development and also helping the maternal tissues as well. Now, there are foods that pregnant mothers should consume. But the first thing we need to know is during pregnancy, there are lots of physiological changes that occur. Physiological changes that occur based on so many things that have happened during this pregnancy, function of the cardiovascular system, renal system, function of the GIT, that's the gastrointestinal tract, function of blood volume, so many things are either increased or decreased. Now, in situations like that, does a mother's food change because she is pregnant and she begins to do something different? Now, for a woman who has not been getting her nutrition right, it's going to be very difficult for her to get a better nutrition during pregnancy. But sometimes it improves because the presence of that fetus that is growing in the womb, the presence of the placenta that also require nutrition, and other things that require nutrition changes the attitude of the mother towards nutrition.
So are there certain foods that pregnant women need to avoid or limit because of their pregnancy?
Yes, yes, especially during the early trimester, it's very important to take into cognizance some of the food we consume because at that point it's so easy for our mothers to go into that stage of miscarrying their babies because there's this irritation in the stomach. There's a disruption, maybe during the production of some hormones. There's always this, this situation where it's either something is lost or gained. Now, foods that our mothers need to, limit, most times foods that can cause irritation in the stomach is cells, like a pregnant woman who is in her early trimester should limit her so much intake of uh, ginger, all these foods that are high, highly acidic in nature, but it doesn't separate her from adding them to her meals. Some will want to increase, their intake of sweetened foods. Those things are very detrimental to the health. Why? Because once you start them, the body begins to crave for them. And you find out that when the woman is faced with something like what they call food aversions where you say it's a feeling of dislike over a particular food, you see that because she has craving herself to liking sweetened foods, it's so difficult for her to correct that particular attitude she has drawn towards that food, and the taste perception begins to tilt towards that because we train our taste perception. You train it taste either you train your taste perception to like the sweet things, or you train them to like the bitter things, or you train them to like the sour things. And at that point, that is what the woman is tilting to. So we reduce our intake of sweetened foods, our intake of fatty foods, Our intake of, some women do this thing that I find so difficult to understand because they do it and they feel it's a normal thing. Oh, they say, I drank my cold water in peace. You may do it and it works for you, but understand the dangers involved in some of the things you do. Naturally, as individuals on our own, we preach that we limit the intake of cold food because this cold food, by the time the body wants to, convert these particular cold things we take to room temperature, it gives the body so much stress and it tends to solidify with our fat. So by the time the body wants to break it down to convert to the normal, room temperature water, it becomes a problem. So you drink it. I know that at that point during pregnancy, the uterus it's hot because you're housing an individual. So it's very common for you as a mother to always fall into that sensation of being, hot, that irritation. You want cold things. Let's limit it because we have an individual in the womb that as you expose that child to so much intake of cold things, it can affect your child in the long run. Not, it may not be now, it may not be seen now. You give it to your fine, but you see that while the child grows up, the internal organs begin to get exposed to some of these things we have done in that we did not see. And then, most times the child begins to experience this catarrh sensation. Some of these children, you see them, their nose is always, I used to call them licking nose. It's always dried. Some of these things are the little things that we did during pregnancy.
Now, talking about sweetened foods, what's the implication of excessive consumption of sweetened foods for pregnant women?
Of course, when you expose yourself to the intake of so much sugary foods, so much sweetened foods, you are tilting towards experiencing what is called gestational diabetes. Gestational diabetes become in the sense that there is this disorder, the glucose in the body is not being able to break down appropriately because insulin is either not enough or it's more than enough. So that insulin hormone, tend to, obstruct, the hormones in the plasma that help the insulin to produce this glucose. So in such a situation like that, you know that the mother will have to start battling with bringing down, trying to, you know, curtail that glucose intolerance, trying to drop down the sugar level, which has elevated beyond what man can control. This is what we do as a result of our liking for sweetened foods, our liking for sugary foods, our liking for, in fact, it's not even about the sweetened food alone, so even our high consumption of our fruits because now you don't want to go for your sugary carbonated drinks and all. Some mothers tend to abuse fruit intake. Somebody at that point of being pregnant, you're yearning for or you want to, instead of you to go for your carbonated drink, you go for fruits like oranges. You don't want to go for the starchy fruit because to you they are sour and they are bitter. Now, some mothers, like I know of a woman when I was consulting who can finish a big bowl of watermelon. If we are not careful, it can also become a problem and we will begin to manage it over time. And let's not forget that some of these disorders, when they come, it's something that takes time to heal.
So, how does this excessive consumption of sweetened foods affect the child?
Sure, it does affect the child. Remember, we said that during pregnancy, a lot of things reside in a woman because of that is what considers her weight gain. That is, you talk about the placenta, the uterus, the maternal reproductive tissues, and the rest of them. Now, the placenta, which happens to be the caudate, that is the channel where these food nutrients are being exchanged, where waste products is being passed on. Whatever we consume is being passed on to these children. Now, when you are used to eating sweetened foods, aside the fact that it can help in the malnutrition of your child, in the development function of your child, exposing your child to so many internal issues. So most of these things we do expose their health. So in order not to cause them to be deficient of a particular nutrient or expose them to health dangers, let's be conscious of our intake of not only sweetened foods, conscious of our intake of the wrong food we take. and correct our food habits. They are very important. Skipping meals, taking meals late. So many of these things we do and we see them as habits can alter. And most times it can also cause for us complications during the time of labor. Most times it can cause prolonged labor. Most times it can even cause stillbirth.
So let's talk about gestational diabetes. For women that are diagnosed with gestational diabetes, one of the things that is checked is their diet before they even put on medication. For women that are diagnosed with gestational diabetes, what kind of diet do they take on in order to balance their sugar level?
Now, the first thing you need to note is what led to her having gestational diabetes. Remember, I said when you approach an expert, there is something that they call assessment. Now, those things, it may not necessarily come from the fact that she was taking carbohydrate foods. That's the misconception there. Remember that pregnancy brings you to a state where there are things you cannot control. Now, I talked about food aversions where you don't like a particular thing but like a particular thing. Now, at this point, the mother may have a liking for foods, so much intake of food, not even the carbohydrates. She may not even have appetite for the carbohydrate most times. But she has learned, oh, because the usual has said we should take fruits and vegetables all the time, she's abusing it. Now she goes, to the market and she's going to source a full basket of oranges and feasting on it all day. It's sweet. Remember that fructose is a part of carbohydrate that we get from our fruits. So instead of consuming that citrus fruit that will give you fructose, which is a simple sugar as well, playing same function as the glucose. So we want to limit these simple sugars in a way because they are refined sugars now. Now, what do you tell this mother? You tell her that there are other fruit sources that she can get. There's banana, there's avocado, there's apple, as many of them that you can mention that can also give her the same nutrient that she's yearning for. Where carbohydrate is absent, we have protein, we have fats that play the same energy function in the body. They also give the body the same energy that is required for metabolic processes. And in such a way, it can expose them to ketoacidosis where these things are absent. So a lot of things can cause it. It's not just about the carbohydrate alone. Now, when they diagnose, what the doctor needs to do is see your dietitian, meet your dietitian to assess you and understand what has led to this. And in such a way, the dietitian now, assesses based on medical nutrition therapy. You run your assessment, you have done your anthropometric measurement to check if this woman, her BMI is in order, to check if her weight hip ratio is in order, to check if there's any presence of abdominal obesity somewhere, body fat stores. As you're running your checks, clinical assessment, by the time you start doing that accordingly, you will certainly tilt towards what is going wrong. So it's not only about the food, it's about the lifestyle, it's about our attitude towards our food.
So before we wrap it up, what is the ideal balanced diet for a pregnant woman?
Well, a mother who is pregnant is said to eat, unlike the normal 1,005 calories per day we recommend. The mother's own is increased to 2,000, most times 2,500, but we say it's kind of going 2,500 is under the thorough monitoring of food expert as a nutritionist or a dietitian. But when you say a mother's food is balanced, we look at our plates using the food plate. We say take 25%, 25%, 25% of carbohydrate, 25% of protein, 5% of fat. We are trying to equate them to sum up to 100%. Now, for a mother, the increase of the fatty stores are there, the protein stores are there. Why? Because during pregnancy, there's so much protein losses. When the mother gives birth, you see that the hair is lost. So many things are developing in the child, and at that point of development, protein is very important. Now, the carbohydrate is not overly increased to the point that the mother cannot control. So what you do, just like I gave you an instance, a woman that is eating rice and beans, she has her usual plate. Nothing changed. Not because she's pregnant, they stopped giving her with her plate, they now give her with pot. No. The plate is there, her rice is there, her beans is there. Now, in order to make it different from the usual that she knows, if she doesn't want the beans, it can also be added to her meal, like the style of the meal change from being the usual rice and beans to jollof rice and beans. You also add other protein sources to it, add vegetables to it, add sauce to it. You can increase it by adding egg to it. And you've completed her meal for that day. And as you do that, in terms of her servings as well, if you say, okay, you're giving 6 servings of this in a day, servings of carb foods in a day, now you can increase hers to 7 and 8, meaning that she's expected to take 2 in the morning or above 3. That means picking from each meal, this is the amount of carbohydrate that you take. For the protein source, you increase it. For the vegetables, you increase it. As you keep increasing the food in terms of their nutrients and not the size, it becomes a balanced meal for her.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Rosevalene, for taking out time to be with us on the program. We sincerely appreciate your presence. Thank you very much. And that's it on the program today. But do remember that when you're pregnant, nutrition is more important than ever. You need more of many important nutrients than you did before pregnancy. And you also need to make healthy food choices every day, which will give your baby what he or she needs to develop properly. So that's the size of the package today. Keep it a date with us 5 p.m. next week, Thursday. And for feedback, you can reach us on the Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook handles that are scrolling on the screen right now. I am Lois Aposambo, and do stay safe.